welcome back to the Valley to Peak Nutrition Podcast. It is Kyle and Lindsay, and I hear this week it is Kyle and Lindsay again here this week. No, this is off to a good start. And we have some great questions actually, and I have cherry picked a couple because these are topics that you have I wanted to say bugged me about, but it's not really bugging me. They're topics that you've asked a lot about. So I was really interested to get your thoughts and opinions on this. As a side note, too, I'm going to say this real quick. We've had a couple people leave rankings and comments in Apple, and one of the comments is they like that we just get straight to the point and we don't banter. I always want to banter, and you're like, these people don't want to hear from me, and you just want to get it over with. So, and we had 1 4-star ranking out of 5. I was like, man, what do I need to get the 5th from you? Just kidding. Appreciate you jumping in there. So we've got a couple of questions. We've actually got like 5 that we may cover depending on how long these go. Try to keep them semi-short just so you'll listen. And most everything about the podcast world suggests the longer it is, the less you listen. So we'll keep it to the point and hopefully get you some good information. Number 1.
Do oral peptides work as good as injectable GLP-1?
All right. So this is one that you have asked me about over the years. I would like to give a little bit of background on GLP-1 for maybe people that are not familiar, give a little bit of background information on the word peptide. You already know the background information, but what has been the main source of curiosity you have had about these, and or what have you heard that drives the questions you've asked me?
The first time I heard of this, or at least what I think is what people were referring to is these GLP-1s or whatever, is when the sister wives lost a whole bunch of weight and they were trying to figure out why and kind of have this weird obsession with the show. So anyway, supposedly it helped with weight loss, right? So then when it got really popular with weight loss, I remember being curious, not because I wanted to take them, just because it seemed like I was hearing this buzzword come up a whole bunch. And so I had asked a little bit then, and then I had seen where a friend, I want to say, does the peptide thing where it's sold and they're advertised that way of like all natural and this is actually for your health, almost boosting it like a supplement maybe. And then claimed weight loss as well that went along with this, but it was the focus of those posts were all about the health of it and how you need this and there's all these, benefits. But yeah. And then the injectable versus oral, I guess. We had a friend who's a pharmacist that had just said that she had noticed this big like uptick in the amount of people. I think this is what she meant, wanting this not per doctor prescription, but just wanting to buy these outright to consume them, I guess.
Yeah. So for anyone who's not familiar, you probably at least heard the term by now. GLP-1 is we did a podcast on this not too long ago. I'll link in the episode notes. So if you really want all the nerdery behind it, you can listen to that and then come back and listen to this. But GLP-1 is really, in a nutshell, a class of medications designed to help a person do 2 things. Number 1, really, really suppress appetite hormones. And part of that is it also slows, and this is number 2, slows how fast the stomach empties the food that you have. So the food that you do eat stays with you longer. Naturally, that means you get less hungry. Naturally, that means you eat less food. Naturally, that means you eat less calories, and therefore you lose weight, right? And so most of these, in fact, almost all of them up until recently have been injectable. And so you take them like a shot, like you would diabetes medication or anything similar to that, and you get the effects from it. In the past couple of years, you have had a rise in popularity in people suggesting there are oral medications that you can take that give you the same response. They slow the gastric emptying of the stomach, and they suppress the appetite. And you don't have to take a shot, which is good news for a lot of people because they don't really like shots. And so the question is that true? So, number one, I'm going to separate the conversation of oral peptides into two categories. One is the only one that we know of that has been shown to be a little bit true. That's not the full story, so hold on to that. And then this is a pharmaceutical grade. You can't just go into your drugstore type of a deal. And then you've got infomercials and influencers, etc., pushing quote natural forms of these peptides and suggesting the same thing. Both of these categories do not work as good as an injectable for one main reason. And this same main reason is also why the one that kind of works. The main reason is this: a peptide is a protein. And when a protein breaks down, it gets converted into smaller particles that you can then absorb. As you can imagine, when it's or let me back up. This happens in the stomach, right? So most of the process from the proteins getting converted into these smaller particles happens in the stomach. As you can imagine, an injectable does not have to deal with that because it's never in the stomach, it's injected. So when you take a peptide orally, it loses its efficacy because it gets broken down. Now, what is unique about the one that does kind of work is that it is coated. I'm going to use just some general language here. It is coated in a way that delays that breakdown. So by the time it does get to you, it still is intact, kind of. What kind of efficacy are we talking about? We're talking about that most people, when they take an injectable GLP-1, typically lose between 10 and 20% of their weight. And with this one oral medication that kind of works, we're talking 7 to maybe 12% of their total weight. And with all these others, we are talking about pretty minimal. Now, you will have people come back and say, "Oh, I took this generic over the counter thing that mimics this oral, it's a peptide, and yeah, I bought it from my neighbor." Where you could ask the question, well, why does that work? Now, I'm not in everyone's head. And like we say with all supplements, if you notice something, there is not a person on this planet that can come alongside you and say, no, no, you didn't. So I'm not going to debate that because it's undebatable. But what I can assume in the work that we have done with people is it dramatically increases your awareness. You are now paying closer attention. You are now checking in. Am I really hungry or am I actually full? Could I wait another hour? Do I really need that thing? And part two of this is most of these come with a quote nutrition program to follow. So they have you paying attention more, eating more protein than you typically would, drinking more glasses of water than you typically would. And there's a heavy emphasis on all nutrition programs now with getting plenty of sleep. So all of the sudden, yes, you're taking this thing, but is it the chicken or the egg type of a scenario where I'm just more aware, or is this really effective? And what we see is, and what we know, from a physiological standpoint about proteins, peptides, and digestion, yeah, it's probably just that you're more aware. So that's my answer there. What do you think? Well, yeah, but when you've asked questions about a particular friend of ours who sells this stuff and suggests that it changes the planet, now that you hear that, what do you think?
Well, I don't know. I think, like you said, I've wondered, and I'm not in their home. I don't know this, but along with a lot of the posts about these peptides being great and look at these before and after pics and things like that, I think, like you said, a lot more comes with taking these I don't know, peptides, I guess, than just you took a pill and then now all of a sudden you feel like you lost a bunch of weight. They're also posting pictures of, "Oh, we joined this gym. Look how often I'm going. Even though it's not a whole lot, I'm working out more." All of these other things. So I've wondered how effective it is. And also, I know that you had talked about working with people who have taken, I assume, the injectable GLP-1s for legitimate reasons, medically, prescribed, and it's time for them to come off of them. You said, "Oh, yeah, yeah, for sure, they're not meant to be long term," but then some people take them long term. Like, what's the worry there with taking them long term, especially if prescribed by a doctor?
Yeah, I would tell you to listen to that first podcast because we interview an NP who specializes in a weight loss clinic in Texas, Dylan Sanford, very knowledgeable on the subject, and so he sheds light on that even more. But I think the bigger thing is um habit development, right? And getting people off those drugs. One of the main reasons is people can't afford them. They are so expensive because a lot of insurance companies don't deem them medically necessary. So you're paying out of pocket. And the cost is just really, really prohibitive for most people to do long term. And so then you insert the caveat with the topic of behavior change, which, this may be very frank, but basically says you relied on medication and didn't change your habits. Now that you can't afford the medication, what are you going to do? And so the angle that I think anybody who really cares about people should be pushing is, look, this is going to be a minimal amount of time. Use the help that you will get as a natural appetite suppressant to relearn some habits. And then once you can't afford the medication or you choose to come off it or whatever, those will be there. And those, whether you use medication to get there or not, if you've used them, are almost harder to stop doing than to just keep doing. And I will not name a person, but say I'm very proud of a person that we have had who basically started working with us as they began to transition away from using the medication and relying on their habits, and were extremely successful because they used the time while they were on it, relearned some of the habits, and then we adjusted that nutrition after they got off of it for any appetite increases that they may or may not have felt. So yeah, I think it's never that easy, but long and short of it is there are no oral peptides, especially not one that your neighbor sells, that is going to be as effective as the injectable type for the reasons that we said. Now, if you purchasing this somehow gives you a buy-in and creates an awareness that you couldn't get on your own, sure, go buy it. Um, I don't know that we know the safety on some of this because frankly, I read the ingredients on that are on the box of some of these, you know, oral peptides, and it's like, yeah, I don't know. I've never seen anything saying this is actually helpful. So here's the plug to consult with your doctor on that. Number 2.
Given my work schedule and personal preferences, I'm typically up at 4:30. I do an electrolyte glutamine drink first thing. Then I typically do personal work projects. My last food is typically 7 p.m. the night before, unless a pint of Talenti gets smashed, then least sorry. Unless a pint of Talenti gets smashed, then last calories are later. My kind of people.
So funny, this isn't the actual question. It's going to be down here. But funny question, or funny little side bit about this part so far is that this came because they wanted to be sure that I corrected my comments on a podcast we had previously as you were describing the container of a thing of gelato, and I said, "Oh, it's Halo Top." I knew that what you were describing was not this brand, but the ice. I think that we got the brands, the packaging, and the contents of said treat mixed up. They wanted to be sure that this is what it was called. He said that he was screaming into into the speaker what the name of this stuff was as I was talking.
If this person is listening, is this the clear container with the black lid that looks really classy? Okay. All right. I'm all about a classy dessert. The question itself, sorry. I think more than anything, my question is this. Is this protein mix, if taken in isolation with no complex carbs consumed at the same time, a waste of money? If I'm eating enough complex carbs during a day or week such that I hardly ever feel that full depletion of energy, are my reserves full enough to still get that protein sparing benefit of consuming carbs?
All right. So, a more concise background. Basically, this person, I've commented a lot on carbohydrates. One of the values of having carbohydrate in the diet is that they are protein sparing. Those carbohydrates, when you eat them, are used for energy as opposed to using some of the fuel, some of the nutrition in the protein for energy. Therefore, it is a protein sparing nutrient. Now, the protein can go to recover the muscle. So, this person was basically saying, look, I wake up early, I work out, I don't really eat anything. I might have a protein drink later, but my first meal with actual carbohydrates is not until midday or so. Am I losing this protein sparing benefit? Thereby, the protein that I'm having in the drink, is it being used as energy? Would I be better just to add some carbs to it? My answer to this person was no, and the answer is no, and applies to you based on two things. Number one, his totals during the day and during the week and during the month still are hit. Right, and that is the beautiful thing, is that the body has a compensatory mechanism built in it to say, "You know what? I mean, as long as you're nailing these things on a daily, weekly, monthly type of a deal, that's what's going to matter most as opposed to just a small picture window of time." The second thing is that part of the reasons we make these suggestions is so that you feel the effects from them. The podium that I've always stood on with supplements is, unless it's making you feel like that supplement is what is changing things for you, there's probably not a lot of reason to invest a ton of time and energy and money into it. Good nutrition will make you feel that way. And so his comment was, basically, I feel great doing what I'm doing, even during the middle of these higher intensity workouts. Am I losing any potentials here? And the answer is no. You're the litmus test, right? So if you feel great doing what you're doing and you're hitting your numbers on a daily, weekly, monthly, whatever basis, then you're probably getting the most juice out of the squeeze that you can get.
I may have missed something here, but what is the belief or what has been the recommendation why you should do protein? It looks like protein and complex carbs together. He's wanting to make sure that I'm not wasting my time just doing the protein. So, where does that come from, the protein and complex carbs together?
Yeah, so a couple of different things. When you consume carbohydrate, the body is going to give you a bit of an increase in insulin. Now, if you look online right now, that's probably like the number one thing people say you never want. You never want an increase in insulin. But if you get done working out, one of the things that triggers the muscle to stop breaking down and to begin rebuilding is the increase in insulin. So you want some carbohydrate in there for that reason alone. Second to that is, by consuming carbohydrate, your body requires energy. So now that you have taken in the source that provides energy, it is not having to use its compensatory mechanisms and go pull from protein or go pull from fat, which are both either unideal to use in the case of protein or much slower to take effect in the case of dietary fat. The reason we try fairly hard to emphasize complex carbohydrates is those are generally going to contain more nutrition than simple carbohydrates, and they are going to take longer to process than simple carbohydrates. And so they sit with you longer, delay all honestly, complex carbohydrates help a lot like a GLP-1. They delay gastric emptying, they keep you fuller longer, prevent you from getting hungry between your meals, so on and so forth.
I think this is part of the point he gets to as well. I feel like this is a little bit off, but still on topic. A lot of people I've heard of want to perfectly time their intake of different nutrients. Like if I do protein at this time, or there was this diet for a while that a bunch of friends of mine did, and it was, I don't even know what it was. It was like, don't ever have sugar and protein at the same time. Never, never, never. It was like, I don't know. I don't even know what it was. But people want to so carefully time things around each other, meaning like protein, fat, carbs. And they also want to time that around workouts. Is it is it that controllable? Is it like, is there that much to a science to it? Or if you are regularly consuming on a daily, weekly basis solid nutrition, truly balanced nutrition, do you have what you need when you need it?
No, timing is way down on the list of things that we care about, right? So we kind of build a nutrition hierarchy that says whatever your goals are number one driven by calories. Above that, maybe even equal with that, is the composition of those calories. What percent of those calories are coming from carbohydrates, proteins, fats, etc. As you keep working up that list, timing is way up it, meaning it matters very least. In fact, the only thing higher than that is supplements in terms of not mattering. Now, the one time that I think that like this is what's so interesting about the culture that we live in right now, especially if you're talking about performance and training, fitness, nutrition, is about the only time that timing starts to matter and that you want to avoid is massive time blocks with nothing to eat, intermittent fasting, right? If there's one thing that research is pretty clear on about the worst thing that you can do to grow a muscle is to not eat. And so if you've got these 12-hour windows of time and then you go exercise on the 13th hour, and there's no nutrients in the system, yes, you are now better to eat pretty dang close to finishing that workout as opposed to waiting until lunch because there's no nutrition in the bloodstream to start rebuilding that muscle. So aside from that, no, there's a lot of different mechanisms that are built in place to, prevent the demise that we somehow have found ourselves causing. So yeah, that was a great question. On to another current hot topic. I wanted to get this one on since it's like fairly relevant right now. Number three.
Can you tell me more about the consumer report that suggested 66% protein powders on the market contain lead in unsafe levels?
Yeah, in a nutshell, this is us freaking out over nothing. Now, now, what I mean is Consumer Report, which is not a great source, put out a report suggesting this, right? And so you got to remember Consumer Report makes money off of clicks. If it scares you, you're going to click. And the more clicks they get, the more money that they get. So here's what happened. This was true, but there is some nuances behind it. Consumer Report tested 23 different protein powders and found that two-thirds of those protein powders contained particles of lead. The number one problem is the reference value that they used to trigger when it was too much lead was the lowest dose allowed by California. So you're talking about the absolute lowest amount, barely detected. That is not what we find in research. Now, you're going to need to hold on to that and listen to the second part of this before you turn off and write us off. So, number one, they are using the lowest dose to trigger that. It's not over the legal amount, it's nothing like that at all. Number two, because some of these protein powders are derived from sources that come from the ground, because some of these were vegan protein powders, plant-based. Arsenic too, even though this was measuring lead, arsenic, heavy metals, all of those are found in the ground. It is virtually impossible to have zero amounts of this in any product. If you eat rice, if you eat beans, if you eat anything, it is going to have some amount because it is found in the soil. In fact, the ones that had the highest amounts in this test were vegan-based proteins, right? And so you're now dealing with a couple of different things. You're using a place that is doing this study. This is not a place that is like a scientific research center. So they want to get you to click on it, and they have chosen to use the absolute lowest amount that can trigger a response under the California Prop. What is that they always call that prop? 65, California. So they used the lowest of dose, and anything that tripped that was part of it. Now here's like the best part. A potato, multiple times the amount of lead found in these. And so it really brings to light, I think, how a lot of these clickbaity articles work. It's like, yes, it was found in there, but if you take a step back and you now use some logic and practicality, what does that mean? Oh, you're talking about it was 8 times less than the tomato that I ate on my salad today? Oh, well, maybe that's not as big of a deal as it sounds like in the headline there. So, yeah, it was found. Is it anything to worry about? It's gonna sound terrible for me to say, "No, you shouldn't worry about lead," but unless you're going to somehow figure out how to stay alive without without eating things, that we
Oh.
grow, make, or whatever, I don't know what to tell you.
Is there I mean, I ask you, but is there a place, a website, something that people can go to find out safe amounts? If they see this, like, I remember, we had Grant, he was little, some people we know had a baby too, and I said, "Oh, have you started feeding yet?" And, "Oh, we would never feed him baby cereal because it's full of" what was it? They said it was full of arsenic, and I thought, "Oh my gosh, arsenic," and I would never give my kids this because it's full of this, and people are doing, like, heavy metal detox. I just hear all about this stuff. Is there a place that people can go to almost like the dummy version of all this? Like, you're my dummy version, but I don't know, if you see something and you go like, "Oh, well, what levels are appropriate?" Like, we just got our water tested, right? And it says they send the report and they say, "Oh, you have trace amounts of" who knows, trace amounts of something, right? And so we went to the water guide and at what point should we be concerned? Oh, it's on the very lowest end of the range, which it sounds like this is. But where can people go?
Yeah, it was uranium. So if we start glowing, now you know why. Backstory behind that, we got a well, so we have it tested, and anyway, that's if we start growing stuff out of our head, that's what happened. The one kind of word that you put in there that makes my answer to this no or very, very challenging is the dummy version. So there are places, they are written, you can go find them, you can access them. The problem 2 problems with that is number 1, most people won't. It's a lot easier, like, none of us have time, right? So we read an article from somewhere like Consumer Reports Lab. We're like, "Yep, yep, I don't have time to check that. I'm just gonna say it. And I'm gonna go tell my friends too." And that's how misinformation gets spread really, really fast. The other problem with that is that if you do have endless amounts of time to go look this up and you go to these websites, and you look them up, making sense of what they are trying to say for even people whose job is this is very, very difficult. And I'll give you an example. Consumer Report Labs may tell you their findings in one measurable and the standards may be in another. So now you have to go convert those to get them to be the same common denominator so that you can decide, okay, was this good or bad, right? So one place may measure it in micrograms, one may measure it in milligrams, and now you've got to figure out the conversion between micro and milli and decide whether or not there is enough there. That standard is the scientific consensus is set up by the European Food Safety Authority, and that can make it sound like, well, why do we care what people in Europe say? And long story short is because the people in Europe decided to do the legwork and, it's been validated. And so I will link I'll link their website. I will link the consumer report that showed the 23 products that contained lead. I would imagine you probably take one or have taken one, and I would imagine that it had lead. Mine did. I don't care. I'll keep buying it. And I will link anything else that is relevant to this topic in particular in the show notes as well. But bear in mind when you read some of these that there is almost always more behind the story than that. And there's another question that was asked about caffeine. It's going to be a good example of this here in a second, but it's almost always a lot more to do with than what the headline says. And so before you worry, before you stop buying a product, try to sift through some of the language and decide for yourself, okay, how practical or real is this? Oh, my protein powder has way less actual lead in it than the tomato that I ate today at lunch. I would probably listen to that more than anything. So,
Will energy drinks block muscle growth? I read a study that said that one energy drink a day can block muscle growth by 90%.
all right. So here is a prime example of rating a study, quote unquote, and then
I feel like this is something that someone's mom said because they wanted him to, like, quit eating drinking Monster drinks or something, like, "Don't you know that?"
yeah, this actually is pretty fresh. We have a friend who is in a fantasy football league and he doesn't drink alcohol. So the penalty for losing in fantasy football in this league is that, anybody who loses has to shotgun a beer. Since he doesn't drink alcohol, he shotgunned a Red Bull and he doesn't drink energy drinks. I think he was in a pretty rough spot for a little bit. So anyway, side note. Yeah, I guess if this is for your kids, you can tell them this is true if you want to, but it's not. But this is a good example of where you there was a study that I'll tell you while I'm fumbling my words in a minute. There was a study that said this somewhere, right? And then someone created this meme based on this study, and this was actually an entire Instagram reel. What you've always got to ask yourself are questions like, what are the data behind the study? How many people did they measure? What all was involved? How did they measure it? If this was one person who never drinks energy drinks and shotgunned a Red Bull, and then they measured, their ability to build muscle and it showed it didn't improve it, that's not really a good study to then create an Instagram reel off of as though it means all of us. And that's what's important when you're looking for studies that are worth following. You want to know, was this repeated over and over and over and over again in lots of people groups to the point of where you can say, this thing caused this problem. We've seen it in so many people that it's undeniable that there is a tie between this thing, this product, this ingredient, this whatever, and this outcome. And if you have that, then yes, you can do that. A great example and something we've talked about before is nitrates in meats. There is enough repeatability there that says once you hit a certain threshold of taking in enough nitrates in meat over time, it increases your risk of poor health outcomes by X fold, right? That's happened enough that there's a pretty strong correlation there. So back to this guy's question where he says that one energy drink a day can block muscle growth by 90%. And he sent me the Instagram slide deck. And of course, they don't reference the study at all. So you can't go see where they even pulled this from. But this is what they suggest in their Instagram story. Recent research suggests that daily consumption of high caffeine, high sugar energy drinks can reduce muscle repair by up to 90%, and in severe cases, suppress anabolic signaling entirely, which means it will suppress the ability to stimulate muscle growth. Here's why. Elevated cortisol levels blunt protein synthesis, while insulin spikes and poor sleep quality cripple the body's ability to rebuild damaged muscle fibers. So, number one, there is some medical truth to that. We do see that in physiology, some of that does actually happen. Increased cortisol levels aren't great for protein synthesis or rebuilding a muscle. Insulin spikes, too big of an insulin spike can cripple your ability to rebuild muscle, but appropriate amounts can help, like we just talked about. So they take this and then they kind of run with it. This is not true mainly because there is nothing that we see where this is true. So you would have for this to be true, you would have to assume that an energy drink caused such a significant increase in your stress hormone levels that it caused a blunted proteins response, increased your insulins, and made you sleep poorly. If it didn't, then we know that that series of events does not happen. Your job probably creates more of an elevated cortisol response that if it's a stressful job, that blunts muscle protein synthesis, causes you to have poor quality of sleep, and keeps you in a constant state of high insulin. And that's the problem. There is an immense difference between an appropriate insulin response after you eat a mixed meal of complex carbohydrates and proteins and living in this state of high cortisol all the time because your life is so stressful, insulin always high because you're drinking soda and eating candy bars and drinking lattes and all of this all day long. There is a dramatic difference between those 2, but, a lot of what you hear is insulin increases are bad, and it's like, no, not all the time. So you've always gotta take things in context, and you've always gotta ask, what's the practical application here?
I know I go back to this every single time, but I keep thinking of that conversation about the sourdough and the insulin, but I guess I mean, none of us would probably agree that it's good to just drink these energy drinks all the time, right? And we can also see that the way this is phrased makes it seem like this is making you have no muscles and it's, whatever. But I know we've hit on this before. Are some insulin spikes good? I mean, I know that I think when we eat a good balanced meal, you're going to have a little bit of that because you're getting some sugar in your diet, right? Even if you're not eating candy. But are insulin spikes higher when there's nothing else in the body food-wise to almost, like, absorb it? Like, if you're eating a piece of bread on an empty stomach or if you're eating, something carby without having vegetables, and I guess there's some carbs in that, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that goes back to the original question of why we advocate for complex carbohydrates to be eaten as a part of a mixed meal. And a mixed meal is an entire dish, right? So we're not saying sit down with a massive bowl of rice. We are saying if you have some rice with vegetables and chicken and stir fry sauce, that is a mixed meal. So the presence of protein, the presence of fat, the presence of fiber all slow the digestion of a carbohydrate down, which really help manage how high that insulin spike is going to be, right? And so, like, another phrase that we say all the time is the dose, the frequency, and the type will have a dramatic effect as well. If you have too high of a dose, it's gonna go up. It doesn't matter if you grew it. If you're eating it too often, every hour you're drinking small white peppermint mochas, it's going to go up, and that's different than one short peppermint mocha one time per week, right? So you will have an insulin response anytime that you eat any or drink any type of carbohydrate, but the severity of that response, how high it gets, how long it lasts, when it goes down, all of those things are controlled by what does the rest of your life look like? What else was that consumed with? How much do or don't you move during the day? What's your genetics, right? I mean, that's a major role too. So yeah, it's not as simple as like, oh, well, does spike my insulin, so I'm not gonna have it. It's like, well, that's not even I think of a barbecue, right? It's like, well, Judy, you shouldn't eat the potato salad. And it's like, well, what else is on Judy's plate? Does Judy sit all day or does she do something? Because that's going to really control whether or not there's any type of response.
And when someone says a spike in insulin, what actually happens in the body when that happens? I mean, I feel like I've experienced that, like, when I was doing the couch to 5K, I kept getting tired and you're like, "Oh, take some of these gummy bears with you." And I remember one time I was like, "Man, I'm feeling like I'm whining a little bit." And I was shocked. I mean, I shouldn't be because it's been years of hearing this and the shirts and everything, but I was shocked that just having a few of these little gummy bears, I was like, "Oh, just a little bit of a kick in my step." But what is that that's my experience with an insulin spike besides just, like, binging on something. Is there what is that what happens?
Yeah, so you consume a carbohydrate and your body will recognize that. That will cause your pancreas to begin to produce insulin. Insulin is a hormone. Insulin's responsibility is to take the carbohydrate that you've eaten, and that carbohydrate will then separate from the food that you've eaten into sugar. It doesn't matter if it's a zucchini, it doesn't matter if it's a tomato, it doesn't matter if it's a donut, it doesn't matter. It's going to break any carbohydrate down into sugars. That is not bad in spite of what you believed, right? So the insulin's response then is to take that sugar and put it into your muscle cell for use, right? So when you had those gummy bears, your insulin increased, it grabbed a hold of that sugar and then it put it into the muscle, right? And that's when you got that sugar or that energy into the muscle, you felt like, huh, I feel like I can go a little further, harder, or longer, and this feels great until you use all of that up and then you need another dose. Now, what happens in the case of diabetes or abnormality or too much is when you consume too high of a quantity for yourself, the pancreas says, look, buddy, and I'll give you just like an example. I'm making these numbers up though. We are producing enough to cover 80% of what you're using, but that other 20% that you decide to throw on because they were so good, you're on your own there. So now the insulin takes that 80% and puts it into the muscle cell, and it leaves that 20% into the blood. And that 20% in the blood that's left over is the problem. And so that is where we get the whole thing of like, it's the dose that makes the poison. Is a donut once a month with your son on dad donut day, hammering your insulin? Nope. Is 2 every morning like I used to pound before going to work, and they were big and good. Is that causing it? Yes, because my body's like, "Look, man, this is every day. We'll cover the 80. You're on your own on the 20, but you're doing this every day." And so now it's starting to create some health problems. And so, yeah, it's a much broader conversation that all carbs are bad. That's just not that's not true and lacks so much context that it would be like trying to think of something that would even be close to that, is a good metaphor, but I'm drawing a blank. So, any other questions you've got? Okay, that is it for this one. Lots of good questions. If you have any questions that you want to ask, we like doing these. So feel free to send those over and we'd be happy to cover them. You can send them at info@v2pnutrition.com. I will link the consumer labs and where the standards are listed, anything that we've talked about that has a link, I will plug all of those into the show notes. If you would like to leave us a ranking or a comment, you can do that. You probably hear this on every podcast you hear. That is really helpful to us, and we enjoy looking at those. I want to say something about 4 versus 5 stars, but you rank us whatever you want. So thank you. Have a good week. We'll be back in another couple of weeks with more episodes.